Alright guys, so we got two computers here. So this is my old one. I'm switching over to this one because I can actually do screen capture with this one. So thought it'd be a good opportunity to show as I'm going to go through and set up my scanner. Probably going to be a little bit of a longer video, but I'll go through basically step by step how I'm going to set up the whole thing, including the wideband and some of the histograms that I use.
Alright, so when we start with the scanner, this is kind of the basic layout of the scanner. I don't really necessarily like this one. I think it's a little hard to see, especially if you're out driving around because everything's so small. And I feel like I don't really need all the gauges, the time versus the chart versus time, and the histograms like all on the same screen. So I like to just put them on one screen. It blows them up and then you have different tabs. So I'm gonna go to layout and then go to like default layouts, and then there's this single pane layout. So I'm going to do the single pane, and then we'll just modify it as we need it. So you can just pick any one of these. So now what it did was it consolidated everything into one screen, and then you have the graph for the histograms, and then the gauge, and then you can kind of move these around if you want to. So I kind of like to see either the gauge is big or chart versus time big. A lot of it is just you're out and about kind of putzing around, and you don't want to have to be struggling to try to see stuff, especially if you're driving, which you shouldn't be doing, right? So I'm going to go through and I'm going to delete some of the stuff off of here that I don't want, and then I'm going to go back through and start adding. So I'm going to right click, go to chart layout, and this whole group 5 with all the long-term field trim stuff, I'm just going to delete all these. So these are going to be called the series, and these are the groups. So if you go up at the top here, you can add group, remove group, add series, remove series, or clone series. So I'll give you the example of remove series. It's just taking them off one by one, or you can go to the group and then just remove the whole group. So scanner I had set up before, I only had 4 different groups, so that's how I'm going to keep it. And now I'll just go through and start to change everything. So I'm going to take these 4 out, and I'm going to add 4 more back in, just new ones. I guess I could have just went through and changed them, but just for simplicity, I'm just going to go to the new series and add the series. So the first one I had here was trans temp. Transmission oil temp. You can double click on it, and then you also have to make sure that you add these into the channels. So what I'm going to do, just to show you what it does, if you don't have them in the channels, I'll add everything to here and then we'll start it, and I'll show you what that looks like before we start adding stuff. So transmission oil temperature, I'm just going to make sure that this thing is in Fahrenheit. I don't need a decimal place or any filtering. This will change the speed, like the sample rate, and I don't really mess with that a whole lot. But you also have the minimum and maximum limits. So I'm going to set mine like 50 minimum, and then 250 for the max, and then I'll change the color to be like a blue color. You can also change the name if you want. Instead of heat oil, I just call it trans temp. So now that one's pretty much done, and you can click on to the next thing. So I'm going to do torque converter slip. Angular frequency, and then this will give you RPM. So the unit is revolutions per minute, and then I'm going to change this thing from 0 to probably like 3,000. And I'll change the name to TTC slip. And then orange for color. So the next one is going to be trans slip, and that's actually going to be a math parameter that I'm going to have to add. So I think I'm going to skip that one later, and I'll show you guys later. So trans slip, it's a math parameter that I set up because I'm calculating the difference between the input and the output shaft speeds for the transmission, and then there's also a calculation in there so it corrects for the gear ratio. So we'll go over that one a little bit later, and then this one's going to be current gear. Transmission current gear. Then you get this thing once in a while. When you select a sensor, it's just asking you if you want to use the default sensor or no, I know what I'm doing if you want to use a different type of sensor. Usually I just click the yes sounds good and it works most of the time. So that one is going to be like a light blue color. And yeah, guys, these colors don't really matter. This is just how I set it up, and I'm used to these colors looking at it. So a lot of times I can just kind of look at the chart and I know the color and where it is on the chart, and I can see what's happening pretty quickly without having to really look at it too much. So current gear is just going to be 1 through 4. Going up to the next one. So we do have, I'm going to move some of these around. So we have knock retard here. I'm going to move this up to the second one. And then this O2, I'm going to get rid of this. So let's just go through and I'll delete some of the ones that I don't really want. So I want RPM, I want speed, I want injector duty, and then I'm going to add throttle position up here. Throttle position. So then we're just going to do throttle position sensor, and we'll do just the throttle position SAE and click yes. So that's going to be all the ones that I want up here. And just make sure that this is 0 to 100%. Injector duty cycle, vehicle speed. All right, so that one should be good. Now I'm going to delete the MAF because I don't want the MAF sensor. We'll keep the MAP sensor. I'm going to add cylinder air mass. Cylinder air mass. And then I'm just going to make sure it's in grams. And then the range on that one is going to be 0 to 2. All right, so we got gram cylinders, and then we'll add spark so we can actually see our timing. So we'll do spark advance. That's in degrees. Max can be at 45. We'll leave it white in color. And that should be good for group 2. So group 3. Oh yeah, I could have just moved this up. It was down there. Same with throttle position. So I'll just delete these now. Didn't see those on there. So group 3, I'm going to add 5 things. So the top one I have EQ ratio, commanded. Equivalence ratio, commanded. And then this one I'm going to leave in lambda. And the range should be good. And you guys may not need this one. I'm using this to see and calculate some other stuff. So that's why I want to see the EQ ratio commanded. Basically, this is what the fueling is commanding. So I can see if my commanded versus actual is good on the chart. All right, now I'm going to add a wideband. So I'm going to take this new sensor, and then I'm going to just do search for my AEM. I have the 304110 version. So I'm going to click on that, and then you can see it's going to try to change my sensor EQ ratio. It's going to try to change that. So I'm going to leave this one in as the one that I selected. So I'm going to click no, I know what I'm doing, and pretend I know what I'm doing. So then I'll have to do some other stuff when we add this to the channels list. So this one I'm actually going to duplicate for now. And then one of them is going to be in AFR. And then this one's going to be orange. That's just how I roll. So I have one that I want to be a blue line. And then I'm going to take one of these new series, erase it, and then I'm going to add alcohol percentage. So we'll do alcohol percent. Leave this in percent. Color is going to be red. And I think that should be pretty much it for how I want this set up. So that was pretty quick to just go through and set up this whole thing. A lot of this stuff, you guys can set it up however you want. This is just how I had it on my last one, and I liked it. Some of this stuff isn't really necessary, like having two widebands on there. But I have one that's reading lambda and one that's reading AFR, which is what I'm going to see on my wideband. So now if I were to just close this and try to start the truck, I'll start scanning. I'll show you guys what's going to happen now that I didn't add any of that stuff to the channels list. Alright, so you can see we're scanning, and some of this stuff is working. Alcohol, transmission slip, current gear, a lot of the stuff is picking up sensors that are already in the channels list, but like the wideband isn't hooked up. Injector duty cycle's working because it has the injector pulse widths already added. So I got to add like the trans temp sensor, and let's do that. So we'll add trans temp. I'm going to stop the scanner, and now we'll go to channels list over here, add channel, transmission fluid temp, and then we're going to look at temperature. And on the channels list, you can see they're already added by them being highlighted this color. So now I'm just going to add transmission fluid temp. Make sure that thing's on there. And then normally when you would set this up, you would go through and do all of your channels first, and then put them on the chart. So just as you're going to add something, add the channel and then add it here. But I just wanted to do it in the opposite order to show you guys what would happen if something was missing. So let's start the scan. All right, so it looks like we still got something going on because it didn't pull up the trans temp here. So let's try to re-add this guy. All right, so here's what was going on. I had this transmission oil temp selected. See transmission oil temp? Well, what I want is the trans fluid temp, because that's the one I have on my channels list. So we'll go transmission fluid temp. Now that should work. There, now we got it, 39 and 39. So that's another thing too. Just want to make sure that you're selecting the right things. It's easy to mix up some things, but yeah, that may be some reason that it's not, just like that. So now we have them all on there. I'm going to go through and I'm just going to make sure that I get all this other stuff buttoned up, and then we'll do the histograms and the wideband. All right, so one thing I do want to add here is this one down here. We're going to change this one to the transmission slip. but that one's going to be a math parameter. So in order to add a math parameter in this list here, for this new series that I want to call trans-slip, you can go up here and you can click on maths. There's a math section down here, but what I'm going to add is a user-defined math. So this is going to be a calculation that I'm going to make up, and I'm going to add it in there. So you go up to Tools, and then Math Parameters, and then I'm going to do User1 Math. You can just do these user-defined maths. So I'm going to name this one Trans-slip. Let's just call it TS for abbreviation. So then you can add some notes here. So add transmission slip calculated using calculated gear ratio as part of the equation. So now I'm going to add input shaft, output shaft, and calculated gear ratio into this equation. So essentially I'm going to go, and I'm copying this one off my other one here, but we'll do new variable, and then I'm going to add input shaft speed, transmission input shaft RPM, and then it's going to pull it up down here, this transmission input shaft speed. So it's going to show you all the PIDs that are down here. This is the parameter ID number, and it's going to show you up here with part of the equation. So then I'm just going to divide this by the calculated gear ratio for the transmission. Calculated gear ratio. Click OK on there. So that's going to take my input shaft speed divided by the gear ratio, and this is what's going to help me calculate the slip. So put a little parenthesis in there, and then I'm going to subtract the transmission output shaft speed. Trans output shaft RPM. Make sure it's in RPM. Click OK, and that should be good. So now I'm going to save this. Trans-slip math parameter. And then that should be okay. So now if I go down here and I go to trans-slip, so let's go over here first. I'm going to do, I already have current gear, so I'm going to do input shaft speed. Input shaft RPM, I have that one. And output shaft RPM. So we'll add that guy. Now I can go down to this trans-slip, and then we'll go to insert, and then we can go down to the user-defined math parameters down here, and it's going to add this trans-slip one we just created. Alright, so I'm seeing that there's not a unit of measure, so let me go check that formula again. So trans-slip, alright, so the unit right here, I didn't add the unit, so I got to change the unit of measure to RPM. Revolutions per minute. Alright, so now we can save this. Now we'll add this thing in there. So we'll re-add the user-defined math parameter. Now it pulls it up in RPM. So we have a unit of measure, and that should be okay. I'm just going to change the name of this one. So this will show us our transmission flipping. So I'm going to close this now, and I'll turn the scanner on and just make sure that we actually get a number there. Alright, so something's missing. After I'm adding the math parameter, the one thing I need to make sure I do is add transcurrent gear ratio. So there's the transcurrent gear, and then there's the transcurrent gear ratio, which is the one that we added for the calculation. So we'll do this. The trans calculated gear ratio. That's the one I got to add. So now once that's added to my channels list, I should be able to start scanning, and then it should pop up a number down here now. There we go. So yeah, I was getting the current gear and the calculated gear ratio mixed up, and now that I added that, that should be fine. So yeah, there you go. Now I'll know if my transmission's slipping. Alright, so I'm going to fumble my way through adding my wideband here. So I'm going to go to Add Channels. Go to the MVPI Pro input. That's what I'm using. I'm using the Pro, and I'm using the input. So now that that's added to the channel, I'm going to have to go down here and transform this thing. So I'll go to Transform. And some of the sensors will already be on here. So like my AEM 4110 right here, this one's already on there, and then you have some math down here that shows up. So this is a little bit different, and I actually had to change mine to recalibrate it. So I could probably just go through and add this thing. Let's try it this way. So we got the AEM 30-4110. So now let's see how this thing actually works. Just adding that one. So start to scan. So there I have a wideband reading now. So I'll start it. So it's really as simple as that, adding the wideband. So you just add it to the channel, go in and transform it. But what I'm going to do with mine, I know that mine is off a little bit. So you can also go in and do this user defined here. So I'm going to add the parameter, and I'll do the 30-4110 AEM. So then I'm going to do no, I know what I'm doing here. So I want to change this thing. So now you can actually kind of change and manipulate the calculation for the wideband. So mine was off just like 1/10 or 2/10. So I'm going to put in the numbers off my old one. 35294, 7.35294. And then I'm going to change this to 0.0 or 0.65. Before it was at 0.68, the original calculation. So I'm just changing it slightly, so it'll change the reading about 2/10. So my scanner here will match what my actual wideband on the column says. So I was just getting a slightly different reading. So I want this to match my actual. So that's how I'm going to go in and change it. So that should be set now. Just double check and verify, make sure the thing still works. So there you go. So that's how I'm doing that one, and I'm going to just double check it later once I drive it around a little bit, make sure that thing actually still works. But now we have pretty much everything working, except for this EQ ratio commanded. So I'm still going to go in and add this commanded equivalence ratio. Make sure that that thing's right. Or is it just not in my, maybe it's just not in the channels list yet. So let's go add that. So there you go, guys. Add it to the channels list. So we'll add that guy. Whoops. So now we have the EQ ratio commanded on here. So what this is going to do, this is basically converting. It's showing my actual wideband, so I can look at my commanded air-fuel ratio versus my actual air-fuel ratio. But I have flex fuel, so I want to see this in lambda instead, because otherwise it's going to be way off. And you'll see that a lot in the histograms, because you can do an AFR error histogram, but if you have the flex fuel on, it's way off. So I'm actually using the EQ ratio error percent histogram instead of the AFR, just because of the changing calculation from the flex fuel. So I think what I am going to do here is I'm going to change this, just because this is going to annoy me if these are overlapping each other. So I'm going to edit the name so that thing's not overlapping. Then we should be good there. So everything here is working as it should. So now I'm going to go up and I'm going to save the layout. And now I have my layout done. So I'm just going to go to save, and we'll just call it scan. Yay. So now that's saved. Then you can do the same thing, save the channels list. And there it is. So that's all mine's set up. That's how I had it before. So I might change it up, but that's setting up the scanner. All right, so next I'm going to add the EQ ratio error percentage. If you're not using ethanol, you can just use the AFR error percentage. This one is going to be pretty easy to set up because we don't have to use the math parameter. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go down here and we'll add another graph. And now I'm going to go to the EQ. Let's just type in error percentage. All right, let's do EQ ratio error. So now we got EQ ratio error right here. So that'll be added, and this is going to be in percent. But what we're going to want to do now is we're going to add the axes for this graph. So we got to add the axis here. So we got to add our column axis and row axis. So basically this is going to be replicating the VE table. So we want this top one to be revolutions per minute. So what we're going to do here is we're going to add engine speed. So engine RPM. And then we got to add the values. So in order to get the values for engine RPM, we're going to go into the editor on the VE table. So this would be an engine airflow and then primary VE. So we're going to take the column axis and we'll copy labels. So if you just go up to here, take the column axis, copy labels. Go back into the scanner and paste that in. Now we have all of the RPM columns in this one. So next we're going to go down to manifold pressure. So I have a 3-bar setup, so I'm going to go to manifold absolute pressure 3-bar. And then I'm going to copy in the row labels. So same thing, we'll go over here, right click, row axis, copy labels, come back into the scanner, and then we're going to paste this in. So now, essentially what we have is our RPM versus manifold pressure, which is going to look exactly like our VE table. So this is essentially creating a histogram that looks like the VE table, and it'll populate our error percentage on the histogram, and then we can just copy and paste it in to make changes. So I'm going to set the high value to 25, mid value to 0, low value to -25, and this will be in percentage of fueling that needs to get changed. So this one will make green, this one will make red, and that should be everything that I need to add on this one. Then we're going to make sure that this is on kPa. It'll look like a really weird number that's going to be really, really low and not even on the chart, so just make sure that this is in kPa. And then you should be okay. So let's try this. Alright, so that looks like it's all set up. I just want to verify the colors are right. So you can see as it gets closer to 0, it'll be white. As it gets closer to the 25 on either end, it'll be the red color, red or green. So this one's saying green, meaning that it's too rich and you need to pull fuel. So then you can use this table to just highlight, and then you can copy and paste the changes into the VE table to be made. Alright, so next we have the gauges layout. I'm not really going to do much with this, but I'll show kind of what you can do with it. So aside from selecting the gauges, there's a few different options you can have. So again, you just right click, go to gauges layout, and you can add and take away different settings, different gauges, just using the add and remove buttons up here and duplicate. Another thing you can do is you can add ranges in for when you want like the yellow or the red line or whatever you want to call it, like for temperature. So for example, if we take this intake air temp, it shows the yellows are going to be from 100 to 110. So like right here, 100 to 110. And then above 110 to 150 is this range right here, 110 to 150 is your 3 level. So that's going to be your reds. So for example, the speedometer doesn't have ranges in it right now. So if we want to add ranges, so if I want to take 100 to 130 miles an hour, is going to be the number 2 for yellow, and then 130 to 200 would be number 3. So that's how you would do that. And then you can also change the amount of the ticks, the major ticks. You can see them all changing now. Now we have 10. Now there's 5. So if we just do 2, you can change all of this stuff in between. So we can put that one back to 5. And then you can also change the ellipse properties would be the how the numbers work. So if we go to 100, you see how it's all changing. If we go back to 135, now we're changing the position of all of the numbers. And then the arc sweep, it goes 270 degrees around here. So if we go to 360, the gauge is going to come all the way around. Or again, if you go 180, it's only going to do half the gauge. So if we just delete all this stuff, it'll go back to the normal speedometer gauge. So you can basically use this to set when the gauge would actually flash and turn red. And then if you wanted to change the size, you can change the positioning here. So if we want to move the speedometer and we want to put it like right in the middle, Right now it's going to be 50% from the left and 1% down from the top. So you're talking this whole range, it's 50% over from the left side, and it's 1% down from the top of the chart here. So like if we wanted to move this thing over more towards the middle, we could do 25% and then like 30%, and it would move it down right into the middle. And then you can actually change the size too. So if we wanted to make it bigger, we could do 75 by 75 and make this thing as big as we wanted. So let's try to get it a little closer to the top here. We'll do like 15. So now it's center. So if you wanted to set this thing just big to kind of sit on the passenger seat and like set up a couple important gauges and then have them flash red so it would catch your eye, you could do that, or you could just keep it exactly how it was. But I'm not really going to do much with this. I have in the past set up like AFR on here and intake air temp. So like a couple things, because I used to sit the computer kind of in front of me on the floor. So when I was doing a pass, then I could see a couple things flash red, like if it was the wideband would flash red. If it was out of range, the intake air temp would turn red, and then it would kind of catch my eye and I'd know to lift or whatever. So you can kind of do a few different things on here. But I don't really use this thing a whole lot. And then here's where you would select what type of chart it would be, if you want the round gauge or the bar gauge.
Alright guys, so I'm not going to go through and set up the AFR error histogram. It's very similar to doing the EQ ratio, except when I did it before, I just pulled in the wideband. Essentially it's the same thing. All it's doing is giving you a difference between your commanded air-fuel ratio and what is on the wideband. So the EQ ratio seems like it's working just fine for me, and that will cover ethanol and just regular unleaded fuel, so I like to use that one. Hopefully you guys enjoyed the video. If you made it this far, I'm giving you a thumbs up. It's kind of a long one, but I'm glad you guys got to see the whole process of me actually kind of fumbling around and like doing stuff wrong a little bit, because it can be frustrating, especially when it's like your first time doing it, trying to understand and figure out where everything is, how to pull everything in, and I've been doing it for a little while now and I still have troubles with it sometimes, doing everything in the right order and trying to get, make sure that this is right and this is right and getting it to read the stuff that you want. It's simple, but it's easy to make mistakes doing it. So hopefully you enjoyed it. Thanks for watching. Have a good one.